Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Elisabetta Gotor, and I'm Principal Scientist at the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CGIAR, and I'm co-leading the CGIAR Research Initiative on Foresight. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this event of the FAO Science and Innovation Forum. The topic of our event today is informing the future through foresight and metrics to accelerate food, land, and water system transformation. Why do we think this is important? We have asked our speakers and panelists to discuss how the innovative use of data, state-of-the-art foresight analytics, and deep and ongoing dialogue with national, regional, and global partners, with a particular focus on vulnerable populations in low and middle income countries, can offer better insights into alternative future transformation pathway to inform choices and sharpen decision-making today. It is my great pleasure to introduce our speakers and panelists today. We have Keith Wiebe, that is Senior Research Fellow at IFPRI and Foresight Initiative Lead. James Thurlow, Senior Research Fellow at IFPRI and one of our work package lead in the Foresight Initiative. Dolapo Enahoro, Senior Agricultural Economist at ILRI, and also one of our work package lead in the Foresight Initiative. And Tonya Schutz, Head of the Monitoring and Evaluation and Learning Unit at the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CGIAR, that will moderate the Q&A session at the end of the presentations. We are very fortunate also to have a very rich list of panelists with us today. We have Lilian Kirimi, Senior Research Fellow at Tegemeo Institute of Agricultural Policy and Development in Kenya. We have Tracy Davis, Commodity Markets and Foresight Experts at the Bureau for Food and Agricultural Policy in South Africa, and Zali Chikumba, Senior Research Fellow at the Zambia Institute for Policy Analysis and Research. Let me give you a brief overview on how this 1 hour and a half together will develop. We will start with 3 presentations from Keith, James, and Dolapo for about 25 minutes in total, followed by a panel discussion with our partners here for about 20 minutes. After that, we will have time for questions and answers based on questions for our participants online. We really want to hear from our online audience, so please use the question window to send your comments and questions at any time during the webinar. When you ask a question, please let us know who and where from you are and which of the speakers you would like to address your questions. And finally, this webinar will be recorded and will be available on the CGIAR YouTube channel. We will share it immediately after the event to the mailing list of those that has registered to this webinar. So I don't want to take further time because the agenda is very tight. So please, Keith, the floor is yours, and look forward to zoom into this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elisabetta. Good day to everyone who's joining online. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to provide an overview of a new CGIAR initiative focusing on foresight and metrics. Next slide, please. This is part of an effort by the CGIAR to restructure itself and refocus its research programs to address global challenges with which we're becoming all too familiar, those related to nutrition, health, and food security, poverty reduction, livelihoods and jobs, gender equality, youth and social inclusion, climate adaptation and mitigation, and environmental health and biodiversity. Exacerbated in recent years, as we're well familiar with the global pandemic and conflicts such as currently taking place in Ukraine. To address these challenges, the CGIAR and its partners are reorganizing our research program into 3 major areas. In the lower right here, one area focuses on genetic innovation, including both crops and livestock as well as fish. On the lower left, a science area focusing on resilient agri-food systems, and this is focused at the farm community landscape level. And then thirdly, at the top, systems transformation, addressing broader issues related to markets, policy, nutrition, and cross-cutting issues like that. All of them linked together with a regional perspective. Next slide, please. So the Foresight Initiative is one of a number of new initiatives that have been developed as part of this reorganization, with the goal of providing evidence and capacity needed to address these complex challenges. Specifically, the initiative will work with partners, decision makers at multiple levels, to develop a common information base and shared understanding of the major challenges facing the future of food, land, and water systems. Secondly, work very closely with national partners to address and explore the specific policy challenges and trade-offs that they face. Thirdly, to enhance access to and transparency of Foresight tools and metrics that are relevant to the future of food, land, and water systems. And fourth, to enhance partners' Foresight capacity and ownership, which is critical to making these analyses relevant to the decisions that we face together. Next slide, please. So first of all, analysis will be a key part of the initiative, integrated across multiple scales. Starting at the lower left with analysis of modeling of biophysical processes, climate, soils, crops, animals, water, energy and transportation infrastructure, and so forth. Going from the very fine scale subnational level all the way up to, in the top area here, global agricultural production and markets, how demand and supply for different agricultural commodities interact with each other across commodities, across regions, as well as over time. And thirdly, then, spanning these different scales, bringing that analysis to bear at the national level and working closely with partners to address the specific challenges that they're facing. Next slide, please. So analysis is critical, but without close engagement, it will fall short of addressing the challenges that specific decision makers face, and it will fall short of incorporating the wealth of experience and knowledge that they bring to the process. So the initiative plans to engage across multiple scales, global level, regional level, as well as at the country level, in each case through a process that iterates through dialogue, envisioning desired futures and alternative futures, making sure we have the capacity to explore those alternative futures, and then conducting analysis in a rigorous way using metrics that are relevant to the decisions that partners face. And then all of which ultimately informs choices and leads to a process where we would continue to engage over time in order to understand how context continues to change and options as well as policy needs continue to change as well. Next slide, please. Both the analysis and the engagement, of course, are intended to inform decision making. At the global level, that can be via shared awareness of the challenges that we face together, as well as the different challenges that different regions and countries face. Hopefully contribute towards alignment of action across multiple scales, and ultimately to inform the resource allocation, whether that be by funders and global organizations down to the country level, where policymakers may be faced with challenges associated with managing risks, improving coherence of various policies, as well as a prioritization to explore, identify, and eventually minimize trade-offs between alternative competing goals. Next slide, please. In order to do this, the Foresight Initiative has established 4 work packages that work closely together. At the top, work package 1 focuses on foresight analysis at the global and regional scales. At the bottom on this schematic diagram, work package 2 focuses on analysis at the country and also at the regional level, regional being sort of the link between the two national and global scales. And then on the left and the right-hand side, these 2 work packages, work package 3 focuses on improving access to transparency of foresight models, tools, and data. And on the right, focusing on building and sharing capacity to conduct and design and to learn from improved foresight analysis. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, the initiative works at multiple scales. Work package 1 on global analysis, work package 3 on making tools and data more accessible and transparent. Those apply globally. And by contrast, work packages 2 on country and regional scale analysis and work package 4 on capacity sharing have more of a geographic focus, primarily in Eastern Southern Africa and South Asia to begin with, but eventually we envision expanding that as time and resources permit, and with a particular focus on Kenya, Malawi, Rwanda, and Zambia in Eastern and Southern Africa, and on Bangladesh and Nepal in South Asia. Next slide, please. So while much of our work will focus on medium and longer term challenges, we also can't avoid responding to more urgent and immediate crises. And this just provides an example of some work that some of our team members have recently completed, looking at the impacts of high food, fuel, and fertilizer prices in around 20 low and middle income countries, looking particularly at the impact of those changes on GDP and on poverty in those countries, among other indicators. So recognizing that the need for foresight is not limited to only medium and longer term challenges, but what's happening in the next week or the next month or the next year as a result of really urgent crises that we face. Next slide, please. Finally, we can't do this alone. It's a huge task, and it necessarily involves many partners. Some of those are other CGIAR research initiatives that have recently been established, focusing on national policies and strategies. Ukama Ustawi focuses on Eastern and Southern Africa as a region, and other initiatives focusing on a diverse range of issues from climate change to changing diets, market evolution of new production pipelines, and so forth. So a diversity of links with other CGIAR research, also partnerships with other global research institutions, universities, and research networks. And finally, and critically, close partnerships with regional and national partners. For example, in Eastern Southern Africa, RENAPRI, the Regional Network of Agricultural Policy Research Institute, Tegemeo Institute in Kenya, Bureau for Food and Agricultural Policy in South Africa, and the Zambia Institute for Policy Analysis and Research are just a few examples. And as Elizabeth mentioned, we're delighted to have partners from those institutions with us here in the session today. So that's it for a broad overview of the initiative. I'll hand it over next to my colleagues, James Thurlow and Delapo Enahoro, to tell you a bit more about a few specific pieces of the initiative. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Keith. As you've heard, one of the big innovations of this initiative, and something that we're really excited about, is the fact that sort of for the first time, at least in my 2 decades of working for the CGIAR, we're bringing together researchers from across our organization with different sectoral specialities and expertise and different modeling capabilities and tools. And we're bringing these modelers together and foresight analysts together so that we can tackle some of the most pressing challenges, the most difficult policy questions that are facing the global food system today. And as Keith mentioned, this is going to involve analysis and engagement, particularly with key partners and decision makers. And that analysis is going to be taking place at 2 different scales. Next slide, please. At the global scale, we're motivated by answering key questions. That's one of the innovations of the initiative, is that we're bringing our modelers together to tackle the same question using our different expertise. And so the kinds of questions we're asking at the global level are, what are those mega trends, the drivers that are causing changes in the global and regional food, land, and water systems? What are the problems that we need to address? And specifically then, what is the role of different technologies, which of course our models are grounded in the science of the CGIAR. Which of these technologies, which investments, which policy choices can make food, land, and water systems more resilient to climate change and help it cope with other stresses, urbanization, population growth, and other factors that are driving change? Now, to answer these questions, we need a complex set of expertise and a wide array of partners. I'm not going to go through the diagram on the right-hand side. It's a bit overwhelming, but suffice to say that we see one of the things that we are doing that is quite innovative is bringing together lots of different modelers into some kind of coherent, integrated system, a common effort. And you can see here in the diagram that runs all the way from climate and demographic models through agricultural models, looking at crops, at animals, at agricultural R&D, natural resource models on land and water, and ecosystem models dealing with pests and diseases and biodiversity. And all of these sectoral models and expertise will be feeding down into global and regional economic models to help us understand what the impacts are on the Sustainable Development Goals, on our ultimate outcomes, things dealing with food security, poverty, inequality, natural resources, and water use. What is the group going to be producing? Well, there's going to be lots of different outputs, but our flagship outputs are going to be, first and foremost, a set of integrated global biophysical and economic models. But we'll also be producing a synthesis of all of what we are finding, and we'll be consolidating that in global outlook reports. And we'll be looking to people like you to help contribute to what is the state of our understanding of the challenges facing the global food system. Next slide, please. At the country level, we're asking similar but slightly different questions. There, our focus is very much on what are the challenges facing policymakers in developing countries. And so those questions are particularly around both mitigation and adaptation and development concerns. So what do sustainable, zero, low emission pathways look like for agri-food systems in our focus countries? What needs to be, what are the trade-offs? What needs to be given up in order to achieve all these multiple objectives? Which policies are going to be most effective at achieving all three of these sustainable development goals around climate resilience, food security, and broader economic development? Again, we're bringing together modelers with a series of expertise, and you can see that again in this right-hand diagram. It looks quite similar to the previous one, but is subtly different. And our major outputs will be climate integrated assessment models for the countries where we work, tools that can be used to evaluate different policies and policy trade-offs. And then we'll be conducting agri-food system diagnostic studies as well. This is where we look at what's been driving growth and change and in national agri-food systems. And to do that, we need to broaden our set of metrics. Next slide, please. So, as our initiative is called Foresight and Metrics, and there really is a strong emphasis on broadening the kinds of outcomes that we can track so that we can broaden the information that can be provided to policymakers. We know that we've shifted to an agri-food system perspective as a global community away from just agriculture, and that requires new indicators. At the system level, indicators of agri-food system GDP and employment, so in other words, going beyond the farm. And you can see on the right-hand side here just how important it is to go beyond the farm, because much of the agri-food system, at least in this case in terms of GDP, is being generated as part of the food system, but outside of primary agriculture. We'll also be tracking agri-food system emissions. We'll be developing new approaches to tracking agrobiodiversity. And then at the household level, where a lot of the policy trade-offs are most evident, we'll be looking at improved indicators of poverty. The prevalence of undernourishment needs further investigation and improvements. Tracking diet quality and the cost of an affordable diet and affordability, and then also women and youth inclusion. These are just some of the indicators that we're looking to, and we'll have to evolve as policy questions evolve too. Last slide, please. We're not doing all of this work in a vacuum. We're not doing this for the sake of science. It's science for the sake of development. And a big part of seeing an impact from the work that we're doing together with our partners is engaging with you, the international community. We'll be holding annual global forums, and the intention is to bring together specialists, national and global modelers and foresight specialists to share their innovations and their findings, and to help us move towards those annual reports, the state of our knowledge. We're working with country partners. Keith has mentioned this already, with RENAPRI, with policy think tanks like CGIAR, and particularly we're wanting to engage together with our partners, ministries of agriculture and planning and environment and so on. And a key part here is we're not just making tools better, we're going to make them tools better by not just making them more sophisticated, but by making them easier to use. And we'll be running training programs so that you can learn how to use these tools as well and make them easy to use. And on that note, I'll hand over to Dolapo, who's going to talk about access to these models.
Thank you, James. So we have a work package that's around access to the tools, the models, and the analysis that James has just been speaking about. and another activity that's centered around capacity sharing. So how do we bridge the gap, our own capacities, what can we offer, and how can we adjust and improve the things that we can offer, and how do we match that up with the capacities that our partners have, and the capacities that they need to support the transformation of food, land, and water systems, as we would all desire. Next slide, please. So our work around access is really about enhancing the access, the transparency, and the use of our models and tools, the data and metrics. And in this sense, we're talking about what's already available from the centers that make up the initiative, but also the tools and models, as James has been explained, that we are creating as a part of this initiative, both within the initiative and in tandem with our partners. And this work is centered around three main components. So there's the documentation of the work, there's what we're doing to ensure that these new metrics are accessible, and then we have a Foresight portal. For documentation, we have the tools like Impact and REAPA that are already available. Some of these are familiar with our partners, but we're within this initiative, we're facilitating the proper documentation, taking a step back and ensuring that people who want to use these tools can have access to what's in them, how they have been developed, what the thinking is, what the scenarios are behind the analysis and things like that. So there is already some documentation, and this initiative would be about making that available. And it's also about filling gaps. What is it that is needed about, what do people need to know about these tools and models that is not already out there? And what do we need to do in-house to ensure that these are available in the formats that they need to be? And so with our documentation, we would be centering this around the models, but also policy briefs, articles, and working papers that rise from the analysis within the initiative, and also guidelines and tutorials for making use of the resources that come out of this initiative. So our work around metrics, and James mentioned what these metrics are. It's ways of measuring outcomes from food, land, and water systems. It's ways of measuring what impacts the interventions would have in these systems. And so we're thinking of this in terms of general descriptive of the matrix. What is it? Where does this come from? How is it designed? How has it been developed? But also making rich metadata available, as well as machine readable data. And I would talk about that a bit more in the next slide. On the Foresight portal, we're making this available open access. So people would have access to the models, the tools, the data, and the metrics, to the papers and reports, and also have access to our communications products that are related to the Foresight. So the blogs, the social media feeds, and things like that. Next slide, please. So our approach to the Foresight portal is one of fairness. So we want that these materials, everything that's been produced within the initiative by the centers that make up the initiative, the scientists that we are bringing together from the work that we're doing with our partners in the focus countries and beyond. We want that this work is findable. And we are also interested in it being accessible. Next, please. So we want this to be accessible. So you not only can see where this data is, but you can actually download it, you can make use of it. We want it to be interoperable. Next slide, please. Yeah, so what this means is that you can actually, you can use the data, you can access the data, and you can use it. And our ultimate goal is that the different platforms, the software, the computer systems that make up the framework of our analysis within this initiative. Our ultimate goal is that we can have these systems exchange data with each other so that there's consistency in how this analysis is all being done, so that there's some harmonization of the work that we're doing both internally and with partners. And finally, we would, next slide, please. Finally, we would also want that this data is reusable. And that's, so those are the aims that we have in making this data accessible. Next slide, please. And in this context, we would be framing how we share our capacity, how we share resources with our partners. We have about 3 main ways that we're thinking about this. There is the planning stage where we are doing this analysis of what are the gaps both internally, what is it that we need to share in capacity, and how can we develop that further? Who are the targets of our capacity sharing? So what institutes, what types of analysts within those institutes, and what platforms work best for transferring this technology, for sharing capacity between the Foresight and our partners. And then within the activities, we have some specific ways in which we want to bring this capacity to bear with bridging the gap between us and our partners. We are thinking of in-person and online training. Some training will need to be instructional, others will be hands-on. We would make provision for people to learn independently and also in collaboration with others. And in all of this, we have a great, we have devoted a part of our work to just reflecting on how we are doing. So internally, how are we building our own capacity? How are we building the capacity of our partners? How is our analysis and our engagement, how is that making an impact on the ultimate outcomes that we and our partners want to see in food, land, and water systems? How is this actually turning from outputs into outcomes, and how are we seeing change and the transformation? And we are putting in place structures that allow us to monitor and evaluate all of the components of this initiative, and to take that learning back into our planning for the next stage. So that is relevant both for us as an initiative and how we grow, and as a legacy that we can leave for others who are working in this space. Next slide, please. Now, what are these specific capacity sharing activities? James has already mentioned the training that we would have with partners. Some of that is already started and ongoing. So we do have the direct training to partners. We also have online training programs that would be more open beyond our specific focus countries, for example. We would be facilitating the functioning of communities of practice for Foresight. So this is around the models, around the tools, around the analysis, around the application to policy making. And in all of this, like I mentioned previously, we will be documenting the Foresight capacity needs both of ourselves and of our partners, and continually tailoring the capacity strengthening that we offer as an initiative to our partners. And all of this we would document, and we would produce the reports and the case studies that can further help with this capacity strengthening. And with that, I would want to hand over back to Elisabetta. Thank you.
Thank you to you, Dolapo, and to the other speakers that participated today. I want to give the floor now to our panelist, Lilian Kirimi. Please take the floor.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to James, Keith, and Dolapo for that introduction to the Foresight Initiative. I will be speaking on 2 questions. How our institute and the work we do relates to the Foresight Initiative, And then the next question will be on how we see foresight informing a policy, and is there a balance between learning from the past and modeling the future. So with the first thing, the first question on how foresight analysis has been used in policy making in Kenya, I would first focus on Kenya's agricultural investment plans and how those have been informed by foresight analysis. Kenya's current NAIP, or the National Agricultural Investment Plan, is based on the current document or strategy that is driving the agriculture sector in the country. We call it the Agriculture Sector Transformation and Growth Strategy for 2019 to 2029. This document, when it was being prepared, relied extensively on foresight analysis. Overall, the document was informed by different pieces of analysis. To begin with, there was the extensive interviews with stakeholders within the sector and even within the country, bringing different ministries and sectors together. Secondly, there was use of extensive primary research, some of which institutions like ours have been collecting over time. But more importantly, in terms of foresight analysis, the NIAP was informed by 2 reports that were commissioned. And these reports were focusing on CG models. The first model was the IFAD-IFPRI-RIAPA model, and the second is the FAO MAFAP JRC model. So those 2 models, CG models, were used to support value chain and flagship prioritization within NIAP and to identify potential impacts. For example, you will see in that document, there is the reference to the fact that having put together all the flagships, there is a likely impact of creating 300,000 jobs, both direct and indirect, by 2023. So that information came from the work was done through the models, as I have mentioned. So the application of these models to the NIAP, according to the drafters, they indicate that added a layer of dynamic scale effects by modeling the economy-wide implications, something that perhaps could not have been done without the CG models. So that foresight analysis has played a key role in getting that document in place. The drafters again say, if I quote, that this was an invaluable addition to the value chain prioritization within the NIAP. But even beyond the strategy for the agriculture sector in Kenya, additional work has been done to inform policy. If I can highlight an example of work that IFPRI, our institution, and BIFAP from South Africa have done on the policy prioritization through value chain analysis. We again used P modeling, CG model, in fact, RIAPA model. And the work we did informed policy on very specific value chains. This was on coffee, beef, and aquaculture, where we were able to identify interventions that could unlock the potential in the value chains. And we were also able to indicate what those kind of investments means for jobs, diets, poverty, GDP, and issues like that. So that has been very important. The other areas we've seen foresight analysis in informing policy, I would say, is in the area of horizon scanning. Some people call it meta scans, identifying the emerging developments and seeing what impact will those developments have. We can assess the potential future impacts through different ways. The other area where we see foresight analysis is in mega trends analysis. I think most of us have done this, looking at what are those major aspects that are going to drive, for example, what you're talking about here, the agri-food systems. So we are interested in looking at changes in population, urbanization, income, diets, technology, and for now, climate change. And in fact, even issues like COVID become important. So that mega trends analysis also is in a way using the foresight analysis. So we see that being used in Kenya, and I believe in other countries where even existing information is used to help forecast or look into the future and help inform policy. The second question I would want to reflect on is when it comes to policy making, do we think there's a right balance between learning from the past and modeling the future? In other words, is there a right balance between historical analysis and foresight analysis? The question of right balance, I would say perhaps it's not easy to think about a right balance, because learning from the past is very important. And that's what most of us as researchers, like the institution I come from, we have used data that we have collected to learn from the past and inform perhaps what's happening currently, or even indicate what are we likely to see in future. So learning from the past is important, helps us to understand our current state, what are the perhaps key drivers, we get to know those, and even identify opportunities, which in turn I think helps us to focus on the next step in identifying a future state where we would like to be. For instance, Tegemeo Institute has collected a lot of household data through across a number of years. In fact, we have a very rich panel data set. And using that data, we have been able to explain trends in specific indicators. If I can take an example of productivity of maize, which is a key staple crop in Kenya, we've done lots of work to inform what's happening in terms of maize, using the panel data, of course, and other data sets within the country, time series data on prices, input use. And that data has been useful in answering questions that are of importance in terms of policy. For instance, we've seen that there has been a declining trend in productivity, and as researchers and as policymakers would be interested in knowing what is causing this decline. And as we look into that, we are able to provide information for policy, explaining that if certain things are not done, then as a country will not be able to achieve our desired outcomes in terms of food and nutrition security. And so when we unpack the factors that affect productivity using the data we have and other data sets, then we're able to identify the levers and interventions that can correct the trend in maize productivity. We can be able to go a little further and do simulations using that data, maybe to understand what else can we do, or what can make, would have a larger impact, which would be more valuable in terms of an intervention by the government or even the private sector. But given all this, this kind of analysis using the data we've been using sometimes is limited in terms of scope. We are able to look perhaps at the local drivers or even regional drivers, but we may not be able to understand or address questions of linkages and interdependencies among sectors in the economy. So in that case then, we can see a limitation of some of that data that we have been using, the historical data. Although I said this historical data is also important for mega trends analysis, understanding those long-term driving forces that we observe today and are likely to have big impacts, or sometimes we call them transformational impacts in the future. So using that data, historical data, we can explain that. But I'd like to add that given the times we are in, and I think James and Keith mentioned some of what's happening in terms of the rapid changes that we are observing, and even the growing complexity of those changes and the uncertainty that creates, perhaps historical analysis may not suffice. Or would I add that that historical analysis would need to be coupled with foresight analysis. And I think foresight analysis in this case will provide the capacity that we need to constantly explore and prepare for the future in order to navigate, adapt, and even shape future decisions through better policies. So it's a key place. There's a key place for foresight analysis. And as the previous presenter said, it's important cuts across from the global scene up to the national and even subnational levels. So it's important for that. And so the role of modeling will kick in where we have this kind of complexity, where we have to address the questions of linkages, interdependencies among sectors within an economy, and even the interconnectedness of the global agri-food systems. So it is important that then we think of the importance of foresight analysis. And coming to that question of the right balance, now I think we would need to increasingly rely more on foresight analysis, given the scale of complexity and uncertainty that we face. As I conclude, I see a few challenges that we need to deal with for us to be able to keep that right balance. One, there is inadequate demand for foresight analysis from the government and other stakeholders. They perhaps don't prepare enough or to effectively respond to developments that are unexpected or unconventional. So we need to create that demand, perhaps by building capacity. Two, we have a challenge of limited technical capacities in local think tanks and governments, ministries of agriculture, or even finance, environment that need to be a driving agenda in this space. But lastly is the inadequate access to the foresight tools and data. And I'm glad to hear that one of the things that stakeholders will benefit from this initiative is that access to the tools. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lillian. Thank you very much for your contribution and valuable observations. Tracy, over to you.
Thank you very much. So I think at FAP, Foresight has always been at the core of our research program. I think to that extent, I've been asked to tell you a bit more about how we approach this, how we generate our annual agricultural outlook, specifically in terms of between quantitative and qualitative input. Also, what our typical audience looks like and how, at least how we think they use the Foresight work that we provide. When it comes to foresight, we typically rely on scenario thinking approaches, which of course entails qualitative inputs, considering the uncertainties, how they might play out in the future, and what type of environment that might result in. This we then combine with an integrated system of various quantitative tools that we've developed over the years. The outlook that we produce annually, that's a single output. Perhaps it's the best known because it's put out publicly every year. But for many clients, we also do initial analyses that speak to identification and quantification of key risks and uncertainties, as well as broader strategies and opportunities. So the quantitative framework At the core of that is the multi-market partial equilibrium model, which we've developed, as I said, over many years with funding contributions from both public and private sector stakeholders. Right now, the regional model covers 13 countries across Eastern and Southern Africa. Commodity coverage is quite different across countries. In some, we only have maize. In others, like Kenya and Malawi, we have 15 or 16 commodities. In South Africa, now we have more than 50. Given its use also to inform private sector decisions, we've often had to focus in quite a bit of detail on specific commodity value chains, which means it's fairly disaggregated. And specifically in terms of price formation, we really try to capture as accurately as possible how these dynamics work within each specific sector. So this implies that accurate depiction of things like import and export parity price levels, how these levels influence pricing within the different sectors. And then for products such as maize, which is more of a regional market dynamic, we also have a flexible bilateral trade system that can then allow multiple markets to interact simultaneously and do the best possible job of replicating price formation that we see in the market. So this is detail on one specific tool, and it's probably the major contributor to our annual outlook that we release. But it's also supplemented by various other modules in this integrated system, which reflects implications of the market projections for food prices and affordability at the one end, at the other end for producer level profitability, and then also through the value chain for gross margins at various nodes in that chain. It also has some spatial and resource dynamics where relevant. This is then complemented by a range of commodity level specialists within our team that work also very closely with multiple stakeholders in their sectors outside of our team, which adds a strong qualitative input on what the core issues are in these value chains and also what the expectations are in the market. Beyond that, we also get inputs from our broader network, both in South Africa and in the region. So this started regionally initially from 2005 with collaboration with the team at FAO and the Cosimo modeling system, where we provided inputs to them also on the regional dynamics in the global outlook. Later was also refined and developed further with the help of many private sector clients, and also to inform very specific questions that we had from those clients with respect to their strategy into the region. And this entailed a lot of scenario type work. Later, it also involved as a founding partner in the RENAPRI network, where we embarked on a training and outreach program from around 2012 to 2014, where we supported specifically the development of country level modules, partial equilibrium models that could then be used within these think tanks. This ended up in the launch of a regional outlook at the annual stakeholder conference hosted by RENAPRI. The first of this was in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, in Zambia. And then the latest outflow of that is the collaboration on the policy prioritization through value chain analytics, the PPVC program that Lillian had also referred to, where the PE model is again one amongst a range of quantitative tools that's combined to inform those prioritization exercises. In terms of audience, we work across a broad range of clients and stakeholders. So I think if I can group just broadly within governments, I think they do draw quite extensively on our baseline outlook, which essentially gives a fundamental business as usual type view to the future, giving us a clear indication of where the sector's headed if the policy environment stays sort of on the path that it's on. This gives then an early warning system on key issues, but it also provides a starting point for further analysis. Then we've applied it to multiple specific questions. In some instances, this is as specific as a single sector. If a tariff is adjusted, for instance, what would be the impact on producer prices and the supply response, as well as on consumer prices and food affordability. But then other inputs are much more broad and integrated, such as the background research that we did recently to inform South Africa's latest agricultural strategy, which is the Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan. And here we really used a value chain wide approach to look at key challenges and also to model the opportunity if some of these challenges were addressed at various points of the value chain. The other side is then private sector, more private sector oriented clients. Here it's often a combination of detailed short-term views and more strategic long-term views. Very much scenario-based, where we work quite closely with them to define key uncertainties and how they would also see these playing out and what sort of implication that could have for their business environment. And then we quantify that through the modeling tools to say what the impact would be in their specific sectors if we move towards one scenario as opposed to the other. Because this is often done to inform company-specific strategies, it's then typically also confidential outputs that's not publicly available. And then, yeah, in the world we live in, that's all the more uncertain. There's also, of course, many short-term questions, you know, impact of things like the war happening in Ukraine and then the COVID-19 pandemic, etc., on their business environment. So I think that's pretty much it from my side. It's a mouthful, but just gives you sort of a broad overview of how we think about foresight and how we try to inform strategies in this all the more uncertain world.
Thank you, Tracy. Very valuable, and thank you very much. Zali, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tracy. Zipper, I'll be addressing just a few questions about how Zipper is aligned and working with government, and how it supports government with regard to its policy formulation and analysis, and also the role that we also play in supporting government in developing its development plans and putting them in the right frame vis-a-vis issues of climate change and the like, as well as thinking through how probably Zambia could benefit through some of the modeling products that are available, especially through the Foresight initiatives. And then I think I will revert to looking at how then Zambia could position itself to collaborate with everybody else that is playing in this field in the initiative of the Foresight. I come from the Zambia Institute for Policy Analysis and Research, as introduced, and my organization, ZIPAR, is established by government to support government to undertake policy analysis and research. So we are quite critical. We play quite critical roles in helping the government to review its policies and also suggest alternative ways of doing things for development purposes. So in terms of national development, Zambia produces a 5-year strategic plan, which we call the national development plans. And right now we are at the 8th national development plan. And this very document I'm referring to talks about the growth aspirations of the country, and also identifies some of the risks to attaining the growth that Zambia wishes to achieve in the medium term, that is 5 years from now. And climate change is coming out prominently as one of those risks that Zambia has to incorporate in its planning processes. Unfortunately, there is very little information for the nation to plan around the area of climate change. So Zambia is really looking out there for support anywhere where it can get the support to try and get the right sort of information. We have used quite a lot of initiatives before, and I think one of the tools that has been critical in informing the planning has been the so-called Zambia modeling software, which is called in short ZAMOD, which I think James was at some point involved in, I think either formulation or advising the government over. And advisedly so. The ZAM mode has some components where it's able to factor in some risks, I think, arising from climate change to some extent. But I think the problem with that same model that Zambia has been using is that it's quite remote based right now, and it is in need of updating. And what the country has done, because it also has identified that it is very important that we should use the right sort of metrics to plan out our development, and especially that the country has lately come under pressure with issues of food insecurity resulting from climate change. We have seen damage to our infrastructure because of climate change. We have seen loss of livelihoods and jobs due to climate change. And our GDP has drastically been affected, I think falling from the highs of around 10% about a decade ago to about -2, in the negatives in about 2 years ago. Climate change has been an issue. So the government has really been committed to finding solutions around this issue. And recently, government has undertaken to develop social accounting matrices as a starting point to, I think, ramping up its modeling so that it can use it as input into its planning processes. We did produce the social accounting metrics, I think, with the support of with the support of FAO, and now with the support of sorry, not FAO, International Labour Organization, and now recently we also participated in the development of another social accounting metrics, which I think we got support from IFPRI through James as well. So we see that these tools that I'm talking about here are going to become quite critical basis for developing of new models that we can use in conducting analysis that can actually inform policy direction in as far as food, land, and water nexus is concerned. So after the development of the latest social accounting metrics, we have undertaken an analysis of the impact of climate change on Zambia's GDP, and looking at its impact on infrastructure and agriculture. And we have actually found out that by 2030, Zambia will be losing about 5% of its GDP due to climate change if we leave things as they are, if we do not intervene. So as a result of this, the government has taken a lot of interest in the issues of climate change, and has actually committed itself to undertaking development in a green way. So we have actually embarked on a green economic kind of like path of growth, where we want to ramp up initiatives that will enable us to develop in a green manner. And that requires a lot of modeling support. We have done quite a lot of qualitative research around the area of food, land, energy, and water nexus. For us, energy is quite critical. Why? Because our country suffers a lot of deforestation, and we have quite a lot of forests, which if we do not take care of right now, we are likely to lose in a very short period of time, because a lot of people have to rely on charcoal for their fuel, especially in the rural areas and the peri-urban areas. And we feel that if we can ramp up energy production, then we should be able to address the issues of loss of forest, and also be able to sink our carbon properly. But the trade-offs are quite huge as well. If you want to clamp down on the use of the forest resources for energy purposes, then it means that the livelihoods in the rural areas are affected. So we need to be able to estimate exactly what it is that we will be losing in these switches that we hope to make. So when we are harvesting water for energy purposes in some areas, because we have impact on an ambitious program of hydroelectric power production. So as we embark on these, what is it that we are losing in terms of agricultural land? Are we flooding lands where people used to get their livelihoods? And how are we going to deal with these interdependencies between the resources? So we need to be able to model our resources properly, our climate impacts properly, so that in our ambition to grow a green economy, we are not actually affecting ourselves negatively in many ways, but we should be growing like that sustainably. Our green growth should also be sustainable. It should not result in net losses in certain sections of the society and the like. So at the moment, as a think tank that is established by the Ministry of Finance, that is also mandated to produce a development plan, we are also advising the government on the implementation of the development plan along the way. So, and I think that we stand at the right point where we should be able to advise government on how we are progressing on implementing some of the objectives for greening the economy. And for us to do that, we need to be able to complement qualitative research with the quantitative research, especially modeling. And I think that the Foresight initiatives will be very, very critical in trying to bring up the balance that is required to make sure that the country can grow sustainably. I think let me end at that point, and thank you, Elizabetha, for the time. Yeah.
Thank you, Zali. Thank you for your intervention. Tonya, I want to give the floor to you because it's important now to interact with people online and answer to some questions we received. So the floor is yours for moderating now the discussion. Thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm iterating the invitation now to post your questions into a little icon that is at the bottom of your screen, so you can find it there. It's called Q&A, and so if you haven't found it, look out for it and post your question there. So far we've received 3 questions, so I would like to pick those up and direct them, like the 2 I take together. So there's one: how can we collaborate with this initiative? But there's also a more specific one from Stephanie Griebel, who is the research coordinator advisor at the World Hungerhilfe in Germany. So it's an NGO, and she's asking, would this initiative very concretely be interested in working with such a development organization in the humanitarian aid sector? So the generic one, and then a very specific request. And I'm maybe directing this to Keith.
Sure.
If you would like to take this one.
Thanks, Tonya. Thanks, Stephanie, for the question, and also for the other attendee who inquired about collaboration. We greatly appreciate your interest. There are several ways that we could explore this possibility. First of all, one of the goals of the initiative is not only, I mean, we've talked quite a bit about analysis, we've talked about engagement with decision makers, but we also want to make information more accessible. And part of that, as Dolapo mentioned, has to do with a Foresight Portal that we are developing, and our colleague Gideon Kruzman is leading that particular effort. So one way that we want to sort of create and encourage links is just through sharing information. That's information about what we do as the initiative, but also pointing interested parties to other Foresight related information that may be produced by other research institutions, universities, organizations as well, because there's a tremendous amount of work that's going on. Sometimes it's difficult simply just to know who is doing what. So we'd like to help make that, help people find the information that they're looking for. So that's one possibility. Another one has to do with, as was also mentioned, we will be encouraging and facilitating a community of practice on foresight. And again, there are other initiatives, or there are other activities like this, but I think one that we're particularly interested in encouraging and strengthening is foresight that focuses on food, land, water systems in low and middle income countries, because a lot of work tends to be focused at a more global scale. But we will be facilitating a sort of a broader community of practice, but also within that potentially communities with more specialized interests. And to all of those, as well as to Stephanie, the invitation for particular collaboration, I think the next step is that we will, after this event, share links to the recording and so forth with all of you who have registered by email, and then invite you, if you are interested, please get back in touch with us, and we'll see what could be possible. We as indicated, there's a tremendous amount of work to be done, so we welcome all kinds of collaboration. We are also limited in our own time and resources, and so we are focusing on particular areas, starting with particular partners, but we're open to exploring more options. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. So the invitation is there. Another question which was more kind of on the details of foresight models and data that is being used. And this is a broader question, so maybe I'm starting it with James, who can maybe start responding to this, and then of course the invitation to all the other panelists and to contribute what you might want to add to James's response.
No, thanks, Tanya, and thanks, Eric, for the question. I think the world is filled with models, and everybody has their own model that they use. The ones that we are focusing on, as Keith said, are really zooming in on key components or areas within the food, land, and water system. So that is one thing that constrains the models, the set of models that we use. Even within the CGIAR and amongst our partners, we have our own models that focus on specific sectors. And so there's quite a wide range. Some of them are coming from inside the CGIAR, like the impact model, which is a global multi-market model. Some are coming from our partners like Tracy and the RENAPRI partial equilibrium model, and so on. And so these models really need to, can benefit from interacting with each other. And so designing scenarios, validating each other's data and baseline assumptions, future outlooks. And so the data we use, the key part of what we're trying to do is not necessarily say one model is the right model to use, but rather to make sure that our models are able to talk to each other, and that those individual models are accessible, and that the way in which we can get the models to interact with each other is transparent and documented, and there is training to help you do that. And so the models we use cover everything from biophysical models like crop models and livestock models, all the way up to economy-wide models that look at beyond agriculture, the entire economy, the entire population, and track household level outcomes. And so the key thing here is we've got a wide range of models, but they all talk to each other, and their data is sort of cross-validated, if I can put it that way. Thanks.
Okay, great, thanks. Does anybody from the other panelists want to contribute something on to this question response, or has James summarized it nicely? Okay, I think everybody feels this was a good overview. Are there any other questions? So really opening it up beyond Eric, Anonymous, and Stephanie. Please feel free to ask anything else that you're curious about. Can also put it in the Q&A anonymously if you don't feel comfortable putting your name to it. Do people need to raise their hand for this, I think? But you can also just open your mic.
Tonya, am I allowed to ask a question?
Yes, I think you can. If somebody else is asking something, please take the floor.
Well, I'll take the opportunity for a moment. Specifically for our national partners, and I think Lillian, you talked with a great insight on the balance between drawing on historical data and experience versus foresight. I want to look at a different or similar question that's a little bit different, which is and this is for you, but also for our colleagues from South Africa and from Zambia, in your interactions with government decision makers, how do you find their how do you find the right balance between the short-term immediate urgent issues that they face and the longer term challenges, which we would argue are equally important, but less pressing in this particular moment when there's so much else going on? Is that a tension that you have encountered in your interactions with decision makers? And if so, is there a recipe for trying to find the right balance? Thank you.
Thank you, Keith, for that question. There's always that tension when you talk to policymakers. They have to consider something that's current and pressing, vis-a-vis what you perhaps as a researcher would be thinking in terms of long-term, maybe have better impact over time. And I think most of the policymakers tend to focus on what is of immediate need, what is pressing in terms of the goals they have. For instance, right now, if I speak about the Kenyan situation, the focus is on food availability, food security, and you can see recently our government decided to lift the ban on GMOs, just because that's a real pressing need for the country. So I imagine that if we were to be speaking to the government about analysis that we need to do, they'll be more interested in what analysis will give us solutions towards our most current, most pressing need, food security and food availability. So I think in our view, that's what they focus on more. And they need a little more nudging to be able to look at the bigger picture, or looking at the future that's, as we are saying, uncertain, but perhaps we'll have to deal with, and it's better to be prepared earlier than later. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Lillian. Any other questions from the participants, attendees? Otherwise, normally I'm counting silently till 10. So that people find the unmute button. I also understand that we are given the time till 1:15, so it leaves us with 2 minutes.
Tanya,
yes,
maybe to just add on to what Lillian was saying, there's always a conflict in terms of decision making for the policymakers, especially in the context of the limited financial purse for making interventions. And the most pressing need of our people, for instance, in Zambia, is that we have high levels of poverty and the food security is a challenge. And whenever there's just a slight variability in the weather that affects food production for 1 year, the impacts can be felt for many years. So while you might want to take longer term perspectives in planning, it is also very important to take immediate term perspectives in planning. But that given, we also have these usually long-term development plans and visions which have these long-term aspirations, which we encourage the decision makers to always finance, so that even as we are intervening in the short term, the long-term trajectory is also maintained to some extent, but the balance is always delicate indeed. Yeah.
Thanks, Ali, for this addition. I'm handing back to Elisabetta to close the session. Thank you so much for your question. Sorry. Yeah, handing back to you.
Thank you, Tonya. And I really want to thank all of you that participated, the panelists, the speakers, but I want to thank also those that participated online. We will get in touch with you, sharing the video, the recording, the presentations, and we hope to, start developing our connections with you all and grow in these efforts. So it's, we are perfectly on time, 1/4 the hour. So thank you, everyone, and let's keep in touch. Over.
Thank you all.
All right.
Thank you
Bye.
very much, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks for
My
your
pleasure.
questions.